Good morning, everyone. It's Friday, March the 20th, and welcome to 7 Investing Live. This is our live stream event we host every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time to spotlight and focus on some of the stock market's most intriguing opportunities. My name is Simon Erickson. I'm the founder of 7 Investing. I'm joined by our executive producer, Heather Horton. And Heather, we started talking about even doing this show a couple of months ago. We're now 3 months in. And when I say innovative or cool technologies that we're going to showcase, we've done quite a few over the last 3 months. I think we've had a lot of fun during the show the last couple of months here.
Yeah, I think we really have. And we really have. I was going through our old shows and it's like, we've hit some pretty wild technologies.
We have, and today's show is going to be about breakthrough technologies, right? What's the cutting edge? What's coming up in the next 3 to 5 years? But before we jump into that, maybe it's kind of neat to review a little bit of what we have talked about here, kind of setting the scene, right? Because we've hit on a lot of topics. I was kind of debating, what was going to be the topic of conversation here for March and April. And I said, well, shoot, why don't we just do a little bit of everything? Let's talk about breakthrough technologies. But maybe if I can put you on the spot a little bit before we jump into those. You've been here for all the shows. You've seen some great guests we've had. You've seen some real cool topics we've talked about. Is there maybe one or two of our previous shows that you really enjoyed, Heather?
I have enjoyed all of them. I loved our show AI Seeing Eyes made by Ouster with Emmett Savage. That one was so good. Oh my goodness, what date was that?
Yeah, that had to be early
That
March, right?
was
Maybe late February, yeah?
oh no, yeah, that one was back in January. Um, which that one was so interesting. I absolutely love that one. February, yeah, that one was back in January.
Yeah,
Found it
okay.
January 30th.
Time
Um,
flies.
right. I just thought that was such an interesting technology and how it was letting AI get better and smarter, but not really infringing more on privacy. I really recommend that one. Also, Emmett Savage is just a really like just a wonderful guest. He was a really interesting person, Shock too. And then the other one I just loved. I mean, bonus goes out to the fiber optic bust to boom on February 27th with Eric Bleeker.
Yes.
And then other favorite was UiPath with AI agents with Steve Symington on January 21st. I will say with that one, we had weird technical difficulties with streaming. And so that one is only on the video page on YouTube. It's not with all the other lives. So you have to go to the YouTube videos, not YouTube lives, but it's worth going and finding it. It's called AI Agents and the Truth About What They Can and Can't Do. And that one was so good because everyone right now is talking about AI agents, and it was a really good overview of the technologies behind them and what everyone's been talking about in the news right now. And Steve is just super bright guy. He knows all about this, and that was such a good show.
It sure was. Those were some really good ones. And can you remind me, if I'm watching this and I wanted to refer back to some of those shows, where do I go? Where do I find previous episodes of 7 Investing Live?
Of course, you can go to youtube.com. There it is. youtube.com/@7investing/live.
Fantastic. Thanks, Heather. Thanks for the walk down memory lane over those last 3 months. We're having a great time with the show. I'd like to thank you again for even making this happen. It was you and I that kind of you were the one really that said, let's do a show, let's make this a thing. And I have enjoyed not only talking about some neat topics like the AI agents that Heather just talked about, like the fiber optics that were being used for the data center, and then the lidar, the solid state lidar. I mean, things like this are really kind of shaping the future. I like to think of it as a glimpse into what's coming next. And we've had some really good guests that have talked about that too. And I want to set the scene for today's show, where we're going to be talking about 10 breakthrough technologies for 2026. And a disclaimer right up front, this is not my list. This is coming from the MIT Tech Review. Every year, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology comes out with a list of what they consider to be the 10 most important emerging technologies, breakthrough technologies, if you will. And they're a lot of debate. There's a lot of back and forth on what should make that list out of the hundreds that they go through. But they've ultimately settled on 10 based on the impact that they think that it's going to have on society or the commercial world or humanity at large. And so I want to jump into a little bit of that list, focusing this show on the last 3 years of the technologies that they have featured. And instead of taking this as a technology lens, which there'll be plenty of in the depth in the weeds of the technology here in a minute here as well, but I also want to view this through the framework and the lens of an investor. If we are looking at these technologies, of course, 7investing, an investing website that we have, this is for investors that are interested in those technologies. Which of these seems to be the most investable, being that most of these are self-proclaimed, 3 to 5 years out? And so with that frame, I said, let's go back 3 years. Let's look at what the list has shown us. Sorry, in 2023, 2024, and then 2025. And then we're going to give a little bit of a preamble or a preview of what the list is going to look like for 2026. And Heather, disclaimer up front, we're not going to get too into the weeds on this year's list on this show. I think that's going to have to be a part 2, but I want to do a little bit of a review of where we've been so far. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully this will work and I've done it correctly. But we're going to take a quick look at the 10 breakthrough technologies of previous years. And so just I'm not just a fair weather fan on these. This is something that I show my endorsement every year and my support of the MIT Technology Review. I've actually, for more than a decade, attended in person to their events. And every time that they publish these lists, I go out there and speak with the presenters, speak with the editors of the staff and everything else. The C-Cell Labs from Future Compute, whether it's actually the presentations, whatever it might be. This is not just a, hey, guess what? Something cool came out again. This is something that's kind of a glowing endorsement from a real deep fan that I've been of the MIT Tech Review. So really excited about a lot of stuff they're doing. Let's jump into the list in the past. When we go back to 2023, the 10 breakthrough technologies that they featured that year were CRISPR for high cholesterol, AI that makes images, RISC-V chips, mass market military drones, abortion pills via telemedicine, organs on demand, the inevitable electric vehicle, the James Webb Space Telescope, ancient DNA analysis, and battery recycling. Okay, wow, quite a buffet of options to choose from there. And if we look at that, all of those are cool. All of those are breakthrough technologies. But I think a couple of them have really stood out in terms of moving the needle for the commercial and enterprise world, and also should be particularly interesting for us as investors. I highlight 2 of them. The 2 that I think that were the most interesting out of that list and that cohort in 2023 was the AI that makes images first and foremost, and then the RISC-V chips. We know that OpenAI and DALL-E were big deals when they came out just a couple of years ago. OpenAI with GPT coming out in 2021, DALL-E coming out the same year, the future iterations of these, and then Stable Diffusion. You could actually put text into, create an image that would then, for at first, be just kind of fun. You would say, hey, I want to see Simon Erickson with the 7investing background, and I want it to be in the middle of Paris with the Eiffel Tower in the background, whatever it might be. It would immediately translate your text into an image. But this is really having a huge impact on the creative world, right? When we're used to a world of Adobe Photoshop or Creative Elements or the software that we used to be charging lots of money for, now all of a sudden you had command prompts that you could put right into those. And it's changing a lot of the creative world and a lot of the companies like Adobe that are participating in that. The second is RISC-V chips. These are the instruction sets that tell chips how to process. This is typically things that would be proprietary. A company like Intel or ARM or AMD would actually put the instruction sets into their own chips, but they wouldn't make those available. That was kind of a proprietary IP that they kept closer to the vest. RISC-V now, especially in China, is opening up through an open source database the instruction sets to design chips from the ground up. And we're starting to see, this is very hard. This isn't something that anybody can just do immediately off the shelf and start creating your own custom chips in your bathroom or in your garage or something. But it is something that is starting to gain adoption. You're starting to see funds put some big money into this. Of course, we know that chip making is a huge industry, $1 trillion industry here in 2026. This is something that I still think could be a really big deal. And 3 years later, we're starting to see some momentum on. Let's move forward. Let's look at 2024's list. AI for everything. Super efficient solar cells, Apple Vision Pro, remember that one, the VR headset, weight loss drugs, enhanced geothermal, chiplets, the first gene editing treatment, exascale computers, heat pumps, and Twitter killers. Again, quite the buffet, quite a lot of options to choose from there. I'm sure that anybody that's reading this list can relate to at least a couple of those, that you're starting to see those in your life today. Certainly alternatives to Twitter are starting to emerge. But the 3 that I wanted to feature from this list that I thought were really interesting. The first was AI for everything. We know that ChatGPT launched in 2022. Excuse me, earlier I said it was 2021. It was actually November 2022 that the first iteration of GPT came out. It has now gone beyond just a text prompt that we were using for free to ask simple questions for. You are now actually having AI do coding. You are actually having it used for enterprise applications. Salesforce is developing Agentforce to replace entire functions. We are starting to truly see AI for everything catch on. And that's part of the investment thesis of a lot of these large enterprise platforms, Salesforce being one, Microsoft being another. The second that I really wanted to highlight from this list that I think is very impactful for investors is weight loss drugs. Anyone who followed our show just this past week saw us, Heather and I, talking about the feud that's going on between the frenemies of Novo Nordisk and Hims and Hers. Right, Novo's compound, semaglutide, is now in an oral pill format for Wegovy for weight loss. This is going to open up the market massively because now instead of getting a shot, you can actually just take a pill, and it's showing very good results for patients. In fact, a lot of people believe that this could be, just in America alone, a $200 billion market, which is twice as large as the diabetes market that Novo Nordisk has served for 100 years. This is a really big deal. There's a lot more competition in the space. Weight loss drugs are getting a massive addressable market. And then chiplets. Nobody in their right mind, or at least very few people, are very, very excited and throwing parties for packaging, for advanced packaging for chips. It's just something that just happens. We take it for granted. But a lot of times, we do take for granted that Moore's law is kind of dying, right? We're getting to kind of the physical limits of how small we can make the transistors on a single chip, on a CPU, on a GPU, even on an ASIC chip. And so there's going to be a need for packaging different types of chips, whether those CPUs, whether those GPUs, whether those are custom ASICs, whether they might be, in smaller formats alongside one another to do specific tasks on the same overall integrated circuit. And so chiplets, which is something that AMD is very, very big on right now, are going to be a huge focus of those large advanced chip makers, especially the ones that have advanced intellectual property that is broad-based. A company like AMD is certainly interested in this. And then in 2025, to move just to last year's, another full list of 10 new neat technologies: stem cell therapies, green steel, long-acting HIV prevention medications, fast learning robots, cleaner jet fuels, robotaxis, here's one of my favorites, cattle burping remedies, small language models, generative AI search, and the Vera Rubin Observatory. Again, the full gamut of options on that, right? But maybe cattle burping, as cool as that is, might not be the thing that's immediately the most investable out of this list. They're all neat, but I think that the three that stood out to me, the first being robotaxis. This is something that is one of the biggest projects for Elon Musk right now. Is like, once you get autonomous vehicles, you want to assemble those into robotaxis, because we know that the market for transportation is much larger than upfront auto sales. You can actually get recurring revenue from autonomous vehicles that are going around and picking people up and giving them rides, similar to the taxi networks or a company like Uber is doing today. This is something really worth keeping an eye on here in the United States. You're starting to see autonomous fleets. New cities are now embracing this. We saw it in Phoenix. We saw it in San Francisco. Now we've seen it in Austin. You might actually be able to, in a very short time, depending on where you live, be able to ride in a completely autonomous vehicle with no driver, with no hands on the steering wheel. Small language models is almost the opposite of what we're used to hearing, which is large language models. There are really, really massive number of parameters in those large language models, which is why it's taking so much computing power to power them behind the scenes, right? This is why you're spending tens of billions of dollars on these data centers to do all of the training and the inference for AI that's supporting these large language models. What if you could have a small language model? What if you could apply the rules and the foundation of what you've learned before, but you don't have to have hundreds of billions of parameters to them to run through? You just want to be trained on your own enterprise proprietary data. And so this is, of course, something that OpenAI, as well as Anthropic with Claude, is interesting to say, hey, can you make a better model that is fit for purpose of what I want it to do? I think that's something we're going to be seeing a lot more of here in 2026 and beyond. And then the last one is generative AI search. For anyone who previously used Google, you now know that there was a disruptive threat to Google last year, where all of a sudden people were just asking GPT questions rather than going out and searching the internet with Google's traditional search algorithms. That was something that Google responded to very, very well with Gemini. Several different iterations of Gemini out there where you've got right in your web browser now, where you can ask Gemini a question. It will answer you directly, but then it'll also give the supporting websites that it pulled the answers from. I think it responded very well to this. I think that we're not done in the end of how generative AI search is going to be playing out. Keeping in mind that about a third of all of digital advertising spend right now is through search advertising. Google made a monopoly. They made a ton of money off of this. They're going to have to keep responding now that there's new competitive threats in the water. So that's the list from 2025. Let's look a little bit forward. Here's the ones that I highlighted from 2023, from 2024, from 2025. Heather, hopefully we can put that image up on the show notes or somewhere else that people can see that. But I do want to look forward and say, what does the list look like for 2026? Rather than showing that on a slide, let's jump right into the website itself. This is a live demonstration. Of course, the disclaimer, I never 100% know how a live demonstration is going to go, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen directly from the website of the MIT Tech Review. We're going to look at the breakthrough list here in 2026. And again, I'm not going to go too deep on any of these. I want to introduce this list and then reserve part 2 of this show to really dig in again on which 2 or 3 of these topics do I think is going to be the most impactful for investors within the next 2 to 3 years. And so hopefully you can see it right there, the 10 breakthrough technologies. We're right on the MIT website. The first one is sodium ion batteries. We are used to lithium ion batteries, which are hard to mine and have geopolitical implications of where you're getting that from, whether it's coming from South America, whether it's coming from other nations. Sodium is much more plentiful. It is not as energy dense as lithium, so they wouldn't be able to hold the charge for as long. But this is something that, based on the economics and the supply chain, could be very, very interesting for the energy world. Generative coding, not just developers that are writing code that is then executing. You can actually now use AI to build entire applications or entire websites that are getting increasingly complex. We've got to watch out for hallucinations. We got to make sure that they're doing the things that we think they're going to do. But again, if you can use AI with no coding experience, if you're not a computer scientist and you can spin one of these up rather quickly, generative coding could be a very big deal. I know students from the college that I graduated with, the alumni group that I talk with is actually already doing a lot of coding, a lot of things like this, and they have no previous experience in building websites. Very interesting. Next generation nuclear. Again, we know that several decades have gone by since we built our last American nuclear power plants. They were down in Georgia. They're absolutely massive. Nuclear is great because it still produces power when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining. And it's renewable. It's not taking a carbon source to power it or to provide the power from it. But can you make a smaller nuclear power plant, something that could be fit for purpose, maybe something for a data center that's consuming a lot of power and needs it all of the time, but it wouldn't have those massive risks associated with large nuclear power plants, and certainly is not as expensive to build in terms of capital expenditures. Small modular reactors, SMRs, are one area, a field of area that's catching on here, next generation nuclear. AI companions, man, this is an interesting one. We are not just using AI for coding or for search. We're actually using it for relationships, not only for the elderly who generally just want someone to talk to. And if they're living at home, maybe an AI companion makes sense. But it is also a study that shows that more than 2/3 of teenagers today have used AI as a companion. And in some cases, even for relationships. People that have not done this might think that's crazy, but it's really catching on, just like online dating caught on a couple of years ago as well. AI companions could be a very interesting field to look into. Base edited babies, we know that they're the world's first CRISPR gene edited babies. Were born in China a few years ago. Very controversial topic there. But if we could actually get a layer more specific than gene editing, if we wanted to look at just individual base pairs of the DNA strand, we can actually remove some very, very problematic genes, or at least gene pairs that are showing up for babies. Kind of the first wave of gene editing was for individual genes. And now we're kind of getting into even deeper into that. Can you actually edit out just very, very small anomalies in the genetic code that could prevent a lot of serious conditions later on? keeping the theme for genes, gene resurrection. There was actually an Arctic wolf that had DNA coded in programmatically into the DNA code of it that was from one of its ancestors from several generations in the past. There's ideas that maybe you could actually learn from the DNA code of extinct or at least long time ago animals or plants or crops that can make them more immune to climate change. Gene resurrection is a hot topic right now. And then the last few mechanistic interpretability, easier for anyone else other than me to say. Basically, can you get inside the black box that is a large language model of Anthropic Claude and realize, why is it hallucinating sometimes? What is going on in the black box in the interim? Why are things not always turning out the AI searches that you want to? There's research techniques that are now actually giving a glimpse of what's going on within those large language models and how they're working. A couple more, 3 more to go. The commercial space stations. This is kind of neat. Space tourism. We talked about Virgin Galactic a couple of years ago. Could you take a ride into outer space, and how much would that cost? What if you didn't want to do a launch every time? What if you could put up something that's like a tourist international space station hotel that you go visit for a week for $10 million? This is now actively being discussed. It's really kind of neat to see these modules and make them more from a tourist perspective rather than just a scientific perspective. Embryo scoring, we've seen polygenic risk scores in years past, which could assess, how likely would a soon-to-be-born baby be at developing a condition, whether that's Down syndrome or something like sickle cell that's a single gene, or if that's something that's an interaction between genes, it's a little bit harder to predict, like a polygenic risk score. Now we're seeing embryo scoring for even more complex things, not just height and weight and physical traits, but even things like intelligence. And then the other question is, do you want to know that? Is that getting a little bit too invasive to determine before a baby is even born on some of these traits? But there is a way to look into the genetic code and find out some things we weren't able to find out before. And then the last one, hyperscale AI data centers. This is one, Heather, we just talked about how large these data centers are getting, how complex all of the networking is getting, not just externally outside of the data center, but even within the traffic of the data center itself, the switching, the networking, all of the things that are going on. These are consuming a ton of power, and hyperscale AI data centers are extremely complex. We talked about a company like Broadcom and how specialized a lot of their intellectual property is just for sending traffic in and out of a data center. So I'm going to stop sharing at that point. Maybe I will show the list in the background as we open this up into a conversation of just all the neat things that are going on out there. There is, any given year, a lot more than 10 breakthrough technologies, but I think this is a good start to just see, what is going on out there. We talk a lot about the publicly traded companies, about the companies that have stocks that are going up or down every day. But then it's also neat to kind of take a step back and look, what is 3 years out there that maybe we want to start getting interested in, or maybe even start investing in some IPOs or even private investments if you're interested in that as well. Here's 10 technologies that are on the list for 2026. And I'm going to stop myself there because I've been babbling for quite a while. Heather, tell me if there's any of these that you're interested in or that jumps off the page for you here for 2026's list.
I mean, first, just looking at the past lists and seeing, especially the 2024 list, and seeing how many of those are now completely everyday things. And it's just like, that's really interesting to see. I mean, 2023 as well, but like,
absolutely,
if you just look at 2024, that's just our lives so very much now. And so looking at this list, it feels there's a lot of feels of like, oh, that's what's coming. And it's very exciting and very good things. Overall, I think there's the multiple gene editing, like baby gene editing, embryo scoring is very fascinating. And there's definitely a lot there of like class privilege and problems, but also the idea of like preventing suffering, which is beautiful. Like if you could help children and then adults live much better lives by, saving when they're children before they're even born, would just be a great thing. I think I'm most excited about next gen nuclear. I think the small reactors that they're looking for AI are really interesting. It's something I've already looked into quite a bit. And when people hear nuclear, it's very scary, and they are quite a bit safer. I am not a nuclear engineer, but from what I've read, they are significantly safer than the massive plants. And it does seem really scary to have like neighborhood power plants. But the way we are consuming power, what we're doing isn't working. And I think a mixture of green energy methods, but nuclear can be very clean and very like a very good power source. And so that's one that I've definitely been researching and really interested in. The AI companions is just so wild, and I love it because I think there are so many people in this world who just need a friend, and I'm okay with it. And
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if you talk to AI as like about like I had a really hard day and this happened and it was really disappointing, and AI is like that has to be really hard. And I use Claude, not ChatGPT, and borderline therapy with Claude. And it's so useful and good just to have like someone to talk to all the time that's there. And so I could see it developing further for people. Um, I'm sure there's people who have a lot of opinions on that, and it does feel very strange to me, but I'm sure online dating felt strange to people as well.
I will
So,
put in a plug on that one to my friend. It's too perfect of a setup for this to plug Persephone.ai. My friend Ashley, who set up an AI for people that have gone through trauma and really tough times and need someone to talk to, just like you just said, Heather. Sometimes that's hard for people to talk about, even with other people, unless it's the right context. But if you can have an AI that's kind of giving you some advice, and you've got to put bumpers, right? We've heard stories about kind of AI kind of saying things that it shouldn't say. You got to make sure that that's taken care of. But what better use of AI to help humanity than something like that? I totally agree. Companionship, big deal.
exactly. And AI is really good at telling you the the base things that like have you sat down and taken a couple deep breaths? Like the things but when you're having like an anxiety attack, it's great at telling you like do your special breathing, do some grounding techniques. Like it can do that. Anyone can do that, but the fact that it's there and telling you to do that and it's not using up a human's time can be really useful. I'm sure a lot of people would be really uncomfortable with that, but I think that that is a really powerful possibility of AI going forward is healthcare, in lots of forms where people just don't have access. I don't, yeah, the mechanistic interpretability. That's not just you. That's horrible.
I had a tough time with that one myself. They need a better tagline, I think, for that one.
So I didn't fully. So that's trying to figure out why AIs are hallucinating.
What's going on within the models? When you ask it a question, how does it come up with the answer that it gives you? And is that the right answer? So Claude and Anthropic and all the companies doing these are actually, believe it or not, using AI to interpret the AI to make the AI even better in the long run, is what I
Okay.
think that means.
Okay. That's interesting. I mean,
Mechanistic interpret I still can't get it. Mechanistic interpretability. One day.
interpretability.
I'll leave it at that. I think it's an
uh,
interesting list. I mean, this is some really cool stuff. We're going to blend this in a couple of different ways over the next month. We've got the shows coming up for April. We just presented the last couple of lists here today. We're gonna follow up on the next show on that breakthrough technologies of 2026. But on top of that, I'm going to layer another layer, which is going to be bringing up some of the emerging technologies mentioned at South by Southwest, which I've been following a lot of the keynotes and presentations from that here recently, layering another layer on top of that with the hype cycle, the Gartner hype cycle, to make sure we're not getting into something just as it's at peak expectations. And then also looking at the Boston Consulting Group's value creation index. How do companies find really neat technologies in a computer lab in Stanford that maps out the internet and the relationships between websites? Bring that, attract venture capitalists and build a business out of it, and then make that business worth hundreds of billions and now trillions of dollars, as Google and Alphabet has done. Remember, all of that started with an academic project out of Stanford Labs. That's what we're trying to find here. We're trying to find the next big thing, and it starts with research like this. So I'm excited, Heather. I think this is cool stuff. This is probably the stuff I get the most jazzed about when it comes to researching stocks. It starts early on. We're going to be featuring a lot of that here, not only at the end of March, but also coming up in April. So stay tuned. 7investing, youtube.com/@7investing/live. There's the link if you want to check out any of those previous shows that we talked about the last 3 months. But man, we've got a pretty good lineup coming up here for the rest of March and April as well. Any final thoughts, Heather, before we kind of adjourn for today's episode?
I think it's going to be an exciting year with a lot of really cool technologies coming down, and I'm excited for it.
I am as well. I hope that everyone had a wonderful spring break. I hope that you're going to get some sleep if you've been around kids 24/7 for the last couple of days. And we will see you again on Monday. Have a great weekend.